So it says we're live, so I shall just go and double check on Miss Digital Media page to see, because sometimes it takes a little while to pop up.
It does. It's not there yet.
It's
Although
always
other people could be hearing us.
Indeed, maybe they are.
Oh, I'm
See.
seeing us and I'm seeing me fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Well, there you go. So on my StreamYard screen, Donna's screen is scrambled, but it seems fine when we're actually live. And I can see there's 2 people watching already, so hi. I'm Beckie Sanderson from Miss Digital Media, author of the Boost Yourself Journal, which is just here. And these interviews are all about the contributors who sent their tips in to be featured in the book. So last week we had the lovely Julie Agnew, and today we have Donna Eade. So thank you so much for contributing your tips to the journal and for agreeing to do an interview today. So it's the first time we've met, and this is what I love about doing a project like this, is that I get to connect with lots of amazing businesswomen like yourself. So Donna, please could I ask you to introduce yourself and tell us all about what you do, and then we can find out a bit more about you, and I'll throw in some random questions here and there.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me to start with. True blessing to be able to come and speak to anybody's audience about what I do. My name is Donna. I am the podcast princess. I have 2 podcasts on the go at the moment. Mindset in Action, which is a podcast for business owners who want to grow and streamline their business. We focus on mindset, planning, productivity, and audience building. And then the other one, which is a seasonal show that is in its first season right now, is called Mic Action Podcast, and that is for anybody who's looking to create and launch a podcast. And that is what I teach in my business. So my podcast started 4 years ago, and with a completely different business, and then people started asking me, how do you do a podcast? How do you do a podcast? And if there's anything I've learned from the big wigs, it's when people are asking you something constantly, you should hone in on that. So now that's what I do. I teach people how to create and launch their podcasts successfully.
Lovely, that's brilliant. And like I said to you just before we started, I did go and listen to your recent podcast with Tanessa. I'm sorry, what was her surname? Tanessa? She is. So that was really interesting, all about energy in business, and I thought that was fascinating. And certainly this is where the idea or the concept for the Boost Yourself journal comes from. Because in business, certainly I created the book initially for myself as an overwhelmed, stressed out business owner. But also for other business women who feel that sense of stress and overwhelm, frustration, that sense of I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. I'm doing all the things, but feel like I'm getting nowhere. Those kind of things that we experience often in business, or at least see other people going through at various times as well. But it's all that struggle with the juggle, isn't it? So
yeah,
I really enjoyed listening to the podcast this morning, because I totally get it. And having had been off for a month, really struggling after having had a nasty cough and cold, still not feeling 100%. I totally get that sense of overwhelm with frustration in coming back to work. So I totally love the concept of your podcast, but particularly enjoy listening to the one with Tanessa. And I have to say, I love your voice. You've definitely got a voice for podcasts or for radio. It's great.
I appreciate that. Yeah, a lot of people say that, and sometimes I listen to myself and then I listen to other people who I think are really good, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm not as good as them. It's that total imposter syndrome I think we all battle with.
Absolutely. But can I ask, why do you think podcasts have become so popular over the last, well, you said you started yours 4 years ago, but why do you think they've risen in the way that they have?
I think, for one, I think it's a UK thing, because podcasting has been around for 20 years. And it's been very, very popular in America for a long, long time. I think the pandemic improved podcasting in the UK. You know, I started mine in the pandemic, not because I suddenly found it and thought, wow, I've been listening to podcasts since 2014. And I think the fact that people were at home, they were going on walks, you know, we were only allowed to go out and walk for a certain amount of time a day. And like, what are you going to do while you're walking? You can't watch a YouTube video, you might bump into something. You know, not you'd probably be all right on the roads, to be honest, because there weren't many cars about. But practicality is you couldn't read a book, you couldn't watch a video, but you could listen to a podcast. Also, I think probably Audible had a big uptake during the pandemic as well for the same reason. So I think that really kind of boosted it over here. And once people actually knew that they existed, then it's kind of taken on a life of its own.
Absolutely. I think it was something that occurred to me, a question that popped into my head earlier when I was listening, thinking, yeah, why is it that there's been such a kind of increase and upsurge? And it makes sense to, you know, link back to lockdown, but it's also interesting to see how many business owners are harnessing this platform to reach and grow an audience. So as a book publisher, designer and publisher, it's fascinating to see what other opportunities are out there to help promote books and, you know, to, you know, leverage your audience, repurpose your content, because I'm all about repurposing. So if you've got a book, then a podcast would be a great addition to that, wouldn't it? And a great way to promote.
Yeah, I actually did a talk into a book mentors group and spoke to her audience about it, because it is such a they go hand in hand. I was like, it's a match made in heaven, because you can use a podcast in several ways when it comes to launching a book or having a book. It's either something that you can use to talk about your book after you've published it and to give your readers that extra insight, that extra connection to you as the author, so they can sort of understand more of where that book came from. But also you could use it in the launch of your book. So if you've already got a book out there and you're going to do another one, it's a great way to get that list building of you know, the pre-launch list going and talking about your book and how you're writing it and what you're getting stuck with. You're like, you can go through the whole process with them on a podcast, and then get your book launched and have more people to actually read it in the first place. So yeah, it works both ways. It's magic.
Oh, I love that. I'm gonna have to have another chat with you about this topic another day, but absolutely love how it can be used in that way, but also, you know, just in a way to build and grow an audience and connect, like you said, and about taking through that journey, which is a great platform to do that. It's not always possible to achieve certain, it depends on the business, I guess, but achieve that level of connection, information, and engagement with social posts or a website, or so it brings other benefits, I guess. But another question I've got for you, after listening to the podcast this morning, you mentioned about Tanessa's application to be a guest on your podcast. And I heard you speaking about, you know, that she did it in the right way. So this got me quite curious, thinking, gosh, yeah, I suppose being a popular podcaster, you're going to get lots of requests to be a guest or to be featured or to advertise or whatever. So do you have any tips on that basis for becoming a podcast guest?
Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing, Becky, because in all honesty, you don't have to be a good podcaster to get lots of people either. There is so many people out there looking to guest on podcasts, and the number of people that want to guest versus the number of active podcasts out there is way out of balance. So there is so much room for podcasting to grow. But yeah, I get emails all the time, and my number one tip for you is, if you're going to apply to a podcast to be a guest, listen to the damn podcast. You know, Becky's interviewing me here. She's not asking to be a guest on my podcast. She's invited me on. She went and listened to the podcast before so she had some idea of who I was and what I talk about. So, you know, exactly. And people don't. They literally, I had one guy, and I've used it in one of my classes before. basically was copy and pasting, and he was like, I love your podcast, and it wasn't even my podcast name. I was like, if you can't even get my podcast name right, dude, you've already lost me. So that's the first thing is, actually listen to the podcast, because you need to know if that podcaster's audience is going to be a good fit for you. And just the name of the podcast alone, or the description of the podcast, isn't going to give you an in-depth knowledge of what that podcast is about. And a lot of the times people do those descriptions right back at the beginning when they start their podcast can evolve over time and become something completely different. So you can't just rely on that. You need to listen to it. And if you can reference a particular episode, more power to you. That is brilliant. But then the next thing is, it's not about selling yourself to the host. I get a lot of CVs, I can do this, I can do that, I can do the other, your audience will love it. And I'm like, really? No, I don't care. I'm not interested. You need to relate something you do. And if you can, the more specific you can be, the better. I would love to come and talk to your audience about X. And that's because your audience struggles with this, and they are dealing with this on a daily basis. And, this thing that I know really well could really help them to overcome that. And I would love to come and have a conversation. Here are some questions you could ask me. I also talk about blah, 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 and then attach a media sheet if you want. So they can, if they like what you've said, they can go and they might want to change the topic. But if you can give them a topic and the questions that you're willing to answer, and it relates to their audience, and you've shown that you've related it to their audience, then that puts you top of the pile. And yeah, that's what Tanessa did. She really kind of went in deep and talked about how what she talks about can really help my audience to make an improvement.
That's really helpful. Great tips there. And what format would you say that should be in? So, like a written email, a message? Would you
Yeah,
send
so
any kind of supporting documents, like a PDF or a recording or a video?
So for me, I actually have I've got a application form on my podcast already. So if you go to the bottom of any of my episodes, there's a form you can fill in, and I prefer people to do that. So if somebody has got an application form, do that. And in there, I do ask for evidence of speaking. And that's not because I just want to see that you've spoken on stage. Somebody did that. They sent me just a video of them speaking on stage that somebody took from the back. I couldn't hear them. That's no good to me. I want to hear that you can hold a conversation, that you can either talk about your particular topic with no interruptions, and you're not stumbling over your words every 5 minutes, and that you can actually, communicate with people. So it's really important for me to hear that. If somebody sends me an email and it's a grabber like Tanessa's was, and it fills all those boxes that I just said, then I'll go out and do my own research. So I went and listened to her podcast, because she has her own podcast. I went on her Facebook before I replied and said, yes, I'd like you. So if you can send them evidence of you speaking, if you can send them your media pack, all your stats, your audience and stuff. All of that can go in there. But yeah, an email is great, but make sure to check to see if they've got an application form or a way they prefer you to apply, because that is often where I kind of like, you haven't even looked at my show notes to see that there's an application and you've emailed me.
Yeah.
So unless it's a really good email, it's just going in the junk.
It's a good way for you to kind of sift the wheat from the chaff, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I ask them what it is they want to talk about. I ask them why they think it's going to be a good fit for my audience. And that really sort of lets me see whether they've actually done any research into the podcast at all.
Brilliant. So one of the things that I've created with my Boost Book Hub members, so I've created a small group membership to support or self-published authors with their book marketing and promotion. And within that, I create various templates for them each month. And one of them is a speaker bio. So would you recommend using something like that for podcasts or about your podcast even?
Yeah, absolutely. A speaker bio is a great thing to have, but it needs to come after the stuff that I spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
So, you know, relating it to them, their audience, why they should pick you, because at the end of the day, you are fighting against a lot of people. Like I
Yeah.
say, it's like you've got to stand out from the crowd. So the more in depth it is better to appear on fewer podcasts and have quality conversations than it is to go on every podcast that will have you and not really get anything out of it. So really be considerate when you're looking at podcasts to guest on, for sure.
Oh, that's really great tips. Thank you.
You're welcome. The
So,
cat's come to join in now.
so if anybody watching would be thinking about creating a podcast, what would be the first kind of steps you would recommend?
Coming and speaking to me, of course.
Oh, of course.
Oh, hold on. Come on then. Excuse me. Twinkle must be obeyed. She's 18 years old. She's deaf. She doesn't know what no means anymore.
Oh, bless her. I've got a kitten, so she's bound to burst in at any moment.
So first things first is do your research. So listen to podcasts, get a feel for how other people structure their shows. How often are they uploading? What does that look like? And get a real feel for what podcasting is. Would be my sort of first step is that research stage. And then there's so much more to it. You've got the branding side of it, which, you know, I know you're very big on branding, and your podcast is something that needs consideration when it comes to branding, because the real estate you've got is very, very limited, and is often like this tiny. So, you know, you've got to really kind of make an impact with it. And yeah, there's so much to consider, but the first step is really kind of getting to grips with what do you like from other people's podcasts, what would you want to incorporate into yours, how do they structure them, what's the cadence of it, how often are they uploading, what do you want, a seasonal podcast or do you want a weekly podcast, you know? And I can tell you right now that either is going to give you ample amounts of repurposing content, like absolutely insane amounts of content comes from podcasting. So it doesn't have to be a weekly, but I don't recommend going bi-weekly or monthly or anything like that. I think the problem is you become part of your listeners' routine. So if they always listen to you when they go to the gym on a Friday, and then your episode isn't there one Friday, they're not going to be bothered. They're just going to listen to somebody else, and then you're out of their routine and they might not come back to you. So it's really important to have that consistency, but you can do a seasonal one as long as you're like all through that season trying to get them on your email list, so that when your next season comes out, you can email them and go, we're back, come on, listen. So it's just a different way of publicizing it if you do a seasonal one. But yeah, that would be my advice.
There's a few things that occur to me there. So it's important to think about obviously the consistency and how regular you're delivering it, so that you've got a podcast there waiting for your audience when they're ready to listen, or they can play and catch up or what have you. But it's also interesting that you've mentioned there about you know, getting them on your mailing list, to send them reminders, to prompt them, send them links so that they can listen. So it's interesting to see and hear how it could be used as part of a customer kind of journey, a customer sales funnel, or
Absolutely.
I hate that word, but it is what it is.
It is.
You know, it's a part of that customer experience, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So the next thing it makes me think about is monetizing it. How easy is it actually to monetize a podcast?
Well, it depends on how you're planning on monetizing it. And I actually wrote an article in the Brand You magazine back in December, 5 ways to monetize your podcast. So very interesting article, and interesting that you bring it up. I always say that when it comes to monetizing a podcast, the number one thing you need to do is to sell your own things. So for me, my focus is my podcast program. You know, that's what I talk about. That's what I sell. And in that respect, then it's fairly easy, because every week you can talk about what it is that you can do. You can have a dynamic pre-roll thing that goes out. It's just a little advert for your product, and getting people to sign up for a freebie or something. So I always say that like your podcast is your top of funnel item. It's the thing that gets people in, and then your freebie or, you know, a masterclass or whatever it is that you're doing, that's the next step in, and that's where you get them hooked with the email list, and then they're on your email list, and then you can nurture them, and then you can have conversations with them, and you can send them your weekly podcast episode, and it grows like that. So to me, that is the number one purpose of a podcast. Anybody who's looking to start a podcast because they think they're going to get sponsored by, I don't know, Adidas or something, you know, it's not going to happen. And I think it really depends on the type of podcast you are as well, to the types of revenue streams that are open to you. And for somebody who is in business, who is looking at working with a particular niche, which we're all like focusing on a particular client avatar that we want to work with, your audience isn't going to be massive. And I think this is one of the expectations that people go into podcasting with, and they just have unrealistic expectations for. They think that, oh, it's the new kid on the block, I'm going to get thousands of downloads and blah blah. It's not how it happens. And you know, for, you know, the likes of Stephen Bartlett, yes, but for the likes of me and you, that's not how it happens. So it really is about growing a loyal listenership that is going to want what you are selling, whether that is they want your free content, they want to just get to know you better, they want to understand who you are, then maybe they want to work with you. Maybe it's not until 3 years down the line. You never know. You know, Amy Porterfield started her podcast back in 2014, 2013, and she has said again and again how people have listened to her podcast, got on her email list, and it's been 3 to 6 years before some of them have ever bought from her. So to me, podcasting is your long tail marketing tool. It is one of those things that is just there running in the background. It's giving you this access to your audience to really showcase your personality, and your stuff should be the thing that you're selling. When it comes to other things, obviously affiliate marketing, you could do that through your podcast. So if there's particular, so for me, I talk about books a lot on my podcast. I'm a bit of a book nerd, and I always ask my guests, what's your favorite book that's impacted your life? I talk about books that I'm reading all the time in my emails, and I'm an Amazon affiliate. So I link all those books in the show notes, so people can go over, click that link, and then they can go and buy the book. And if they do, I might get a little bit of commission. Not always, because it depends on the item, but yeah, there's things like that you can do. So you could affiliate for somebody else. I did the Amy Porterfield's affiliate program last year for her digital course, so I was promoting that for 3 months on my podcast. You know, you could do these kind of things with your podcast, but if you're looking at getting adverts, I would warn against it, just because it upsets people. You know, if there's too many adverts in it, it's just annoying, especially if they're driving and they can't skip them easily, and it can be off-putting. But you know, they're invested in you as the host. So they come to you every week and listen to what you've got to say. So if you've got something to say about a product that you're selling, they're much more likely to want to listen to it than they are if HelloFresh pops up in the middle of your podcast with an advert. Like, it's it's not accepted as well.
Yeah, I guess it has to be, you know, you have to be selective in terms of what you would put in and what you wouldn't, I guess. But really interesting points there, particularly about the affiliate marketing and the different revenue streams. It's certainly given me a lot more insight into, you know, how you can benefit or create these different opportunities through using podcasting. I'm not an avid podcast listener. I'm an impatient listener. That's my problem. But
I speed it up. I always speed it up. I can't listen on normal speed. Everything is like 1.5 speed. I can't do normal
speed. Chipmunks. Everybody sounds like chipmunks. But yeah, I think it's something that is interesting, that what you're saying about it being a long tail marketing technique. And it makes sense, because it's something that you know, has to be successful long term, I guess. And success is different depending on who you speak to and what terms you're talking about. But to establish something long term, consistency consistently is going to bring you that expert in your field status, which is what a lot of business owners are obviously looking for, and that's what I'm teaching with books, that it can bring that. So anything where there's a crossover between the platforms, between you know, where you can repurpose that content, where you can reach your target audience, your, you know, the ideal clients, the ideal avatars that you're aiming for, so much the better. So I can see how it would suit well with some of my clients, but also how in business in general that podcast is a platform, a tool, a technique that is going to be really beneficial to lots and lots of different people. So loving the idea. I don't think I'd ever be a podcaster myself, but I have been featured on other podcasts, and I love to talk, as you can tell. So I think it's something that I should perhaps be looking to tap into a bit more, particularly as you say, there's so much potential for growth in this area.
Yeah.
Another thing, before we move on to talking about the tips, because we've already had a lot to say already, I would love to ask you, do you know anything about Substack, or is there a particular platform that you would recommend for anybody just starting out as a podcaster?
So I have absolutely no idea what Substack is.
Okay.
I think one of my friends has a blog on Substack that I read occasionally, and that is the extent of my knowledge on there. When it comes to podcasting, you need to have a host platform that is going to enable you to filter out your RSS feed to the directories. So Apple Podcast is a directory, Spotify is a directory, Good Pods, Podchaser, Acaster. These are all platforms, directories, sorry, that will grab your RSS feed from wherever you're hosting your podcast and put it on their platform. So they're directories. Your platform is where you would upload your podcast as often as you're planning on uploading it. That's where you store your show notes. It's where you store your description. My favorite is Buzzsprout. And I will sing about Buzzsprout all day long because I think they're a fantastic company. They've always been really good on the customer service side if I've ever needed them, but I have very, very rarely needed them because everything is so simple. And it's a platform where there's room to grow. So they have extra things in there like music mastery. So if you want to sort of just boost your audio, they've got an add-on that you can pay for that. They also have their co-host AI, which is a lifesaver. It listens to your podcast, it produces your show notes, it produces a blog post, it produces a transcript, it produces social media posts for you.
Wow.
And all you have to do is copy and paste. I do edit because it's all Americanized spelling for a start. And sometimes it sort of does it in like it was my assistant doing it. So it goes, Donna Eade on this week's button. I'm like, no, I.
Yeah.
So I do go through and edit and I chop things out and whatnot. But it gives me something, you know, I'm one of
Gives
these
you a
people who,
starting point, though.
I hate starting from a blank page. So Buzzsprout for definite. They give you 90 days free to start with as well, which is what I did, which allowed me to have 3 months of giving it a good go. Before I decided whether it was something I wanted to continue with. And I think that is a really great thing before you have to start paying to keep your back catalogue.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a good opportunity then to test the water with it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Right, well, I suppose we should move on. I could ask you lots and lots of more questions. I think we could probably talk for a good hour, but we should move on. So, boost yourself. So you've got one there, yay!
I have,
So
yay!
don't forget to send me your boost yourself book
I'll send you a picture.
But so going to Donna's tips now. So like we said, there's lots of tips from all sorts of different business women in the Boost Yourself journal. But there's from all sorts of different areas, topics, different businesses doing different things. But Donna, as we know, is a podcaster and podcast mentor. But the tips that you gave were on page 89. I have learning gives you great ideas, but imperfect action gets results. You need both in business. I totally agree. But can you explain why is it that you chose to give us that one particularly, Donna?
Um, because I think a lot of people get stuck, and it's one that I have to tell myself a lot because I love learning. Like, I was a mature student. I went back to uni in 2009, before we could call it 20 something, 2009, and graduated in 2012. My daughter was 9 years old when I started, graduated when she was 12. And I love learning. I love going back. I love to learn new things, new skills, new everything. I'm just like, I'm here for it. But the problem is if you just learn and learn and learn and you never take action, then you're never going to get anywhere. So that's why, and then imperfect action is something that I've just heard a lot of, like, Stu McLaren, who I follow, says, it doesn't have to be perfect, you just have to get it going. That's something that's really stuck with me. And I was just like, yeah, do you know what, that's been my whole business. A lot of people watch me in my business and, like, commend me for what I do, and really I'm just doing the thing. Like, I'm just taking action, and sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes I get really upset about that, and, like, I can get really down about things and feel like I'm really stuck. But the one thing that I do is I keep moving forward. So learning is great, and we all need to learn, and we're never ever all going to know everything we need to know about working in business, because things are changing all the time. But if you don't put that stuff into action, you'll never see what's working to know what you need to continue with and what you need to let go. So imperfect action is where you get your results. And yeah, you need both in business.
I love that, and I think you're right, because and to get in the bit about learning as well, but totally agree. Sometimes we get so stuck in a funk, and about perfection, with the
Yeah.
perfectionist hat on, but actually sometimes you've just got to bloody do something.
Yeah, just do
I
it.
mean, I nearly swore, but it's not.
Remembered where you were.
Yeah. So just do something, and I think that is really powerful. I like the phrase "eat the frog," which a lot of people don't, and feel the fear and do it anyway. Which
Yeah.
some people kind of think, well, what's to be feared? But I think there's a lot to be gained from doing something like that. Put yourself out your comfort zone,
Yeah.
because the feels that you get after you've done it,
Yeah.
kind of are worth it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next one you have: consistency won't bring success. Consistently improving will, which kind of is similar to the previous one, in a way, but
They
similar
go
but
together.
different. Yeah, they do. They
Yeah,
fit
they
together
do.
really nicely, and
Yeah.
also fit together with what you were saying also about building that consistency with the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the problem. I see it all the time. People go, oh, you've just got to be consistent. You've just got to be consistent. And I can tell you, I am the consistency queen. Like, I would do stuff on social media and I would be consistent, like months and months of consistency, and not getting anywhere, and thinking, like, what the heck? Like, why is this not working? And I realized that it was because I was consistently doing the same thing. And, if you consistently bash your head against a wall, you're going to get the same result. So it's really important to me for people to realize that there's power in that 1% improvement. And I can't remember what book I read about the 1% improvement in, but it was definitely a book. And that power of 1% and improving by 1% each time is going to get you somewhere, but you have to be consistent about that improvement. And that is what is going to lead to the success, because you can show up every day and do the same thing every day, and you're going to get the same results. But if you show up every day and just make micro improvements to what you're doing, that is when you're going to start to see the growth. And that is where my podcasting comes in, because I started this 4 years ago. I have not been consistent for 4 years with my social media, but I have been consistent with my podcast. And I would like to say that if you went back, and please don't do this, went back and listened to episode 1 of my podcast, you would see a vast improvement in the way I talk, in the way I interview, in the way it sounds, because I have made those improvements along the way. And I've consistently shown up for 4 years. And now that consistency is starting to pay off. I got my quotes in a book. if I hadn't got my podcast, I wouldn't have even thought about that. I got an article out last year. I spoke in 3 private groups last quarter. I've got speaking opportunities coming up. I'm working with corporate clients on a podcast for them, and they've invited me to do a workshop in September for their members. And so there's all these things that are opening up now, 4 years in. And I have to say, my situation's a little bit different in the case, because you might think, oh God, have I got to wait 4 years? But remember, I started my podcast with a different business. So this business has only been going for a year, but my podcast has been going for 4. So I've got the 4 years of, I can podcast, I'm good at what I do, and a year of teaching. Well, a little bit longer than a year because I did some workshops the year before, but this business has been in place for a year, but it's consistently showing up, and that has led to the successes that I'm starting to see trickle through, which is magic. So consistency is great, but you've got to consistently improve to see the success.
That's brilliant back up your quote there. You've evidenced it in lots of different ways with your explanation there, so thank you. But on another note, consistency, I think, is different for everybody. I think I myself, talk about consistency in branding, consistency in showing up, but I think it's an important point to make that consistency can look different from each business to each business. And
Absolutely.
that, it's not necessarily about showing up every day or even every week on social media, but it's about showing up regularly for delivering the same thing, or for showing up regularly when you do show up, to provide value or to provide some kind of insight or something. But to do that consistently is tricky, but it's achievable, but it's going to look different for everybody. I think because there's just so much negative pressure and toxic talk around showing up and
you
being.
feel like you've got to show up every day on social media. It means you've got to get your makeup done and your hair done, and it's like too much pressure. But if you said, actually, no, just show up on Friday and do a live, just on Friday for 10 minutes, and you did that consistently, then that is going to do so much more for your business than showing up every day half-hearted because you don't really want to do it. You've got to find what works for you. And when you're talking about consistency of person, showing up as the authentic you and being consistent with who you are as a person is going to lead you so much further than showing up because you think you should, and this is the way you should show up. So just something on that. Brilliant.
That's brilliant. But we've talked about so much. We've covered such a lot of ground already.
We have.
But we've got just a few minutes left, and I'd love for you to tell us about where we can connect with you. Do you have any kind of free resources that you can share? You mentioned the article about monetizing a blog, so please do share that in the comments after we finish the session. But do you have any offers that you'd like to tell us about?
Well, there's a lot going on right now. I am just opening up my spring cohorts for the Start Your Podcast program. So it's an 8-week program that guides you through from idea to launch for your podcast. And launching is a big thing for me. It's really, really important when you're doing a podcast that you have a proper launch runway in place. So the 8-week program takes you through all of that. There's loads of goodies in there, loads of bonuses, and also access to me. So I'm a big believer in the personal touch. So everybody who comes on my program gets to directly message me on a weekly basis with any questions, so they don't get stuck waiting for a Q&A that happens once a week. I want people to get moving and actually take action. So it's really important for me. So that's open for enrollment at the moment, and anybody who applies before Friday evening at midnight, so basically Saturday morning, has the opportunity to win one of my microphones. So this microphone that I use, I'm actually giving away to one lucky winner who applies to my program by midnight Friday night. And so that's my program. Obviously, that's a paid thing. But if you want to find me, donnaeade.com is where you will find me. I have a 3-part audio series that is called Build Your Authority with Podcasting. That is available at donnaeade.com/3-part audio. I will link that in the comments afterwards for you guys. So that's a free resource. There are other freebies floating around my website if you want to go and have a look at those. I hang out a lot on Instagram, and LinkedIn are my favorite places to hang out. I do hang out on Facebook, but only in groups generally, where I connect with some fantastic business women that we both know, Becky. So.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining today, Donna. It's been lovely to chat with you, and it makes me so excited about doing more of these interviews and really celebrating all of the wonderful businesswomen that have contributed to this special little book, because it's really is special. It does mean a lot to me. It's, you know, it's what I do. I design books, but it's all about boosting yourself, boosting your brand, so that you can show up and do your thing, do that amazing stuff that you do, whatever that is. So for you, Donna, it's all about podcasts. For me, it's about books, branding, and the common thing between us is that we're about using our skills and expertise to help, as you put, amplify the business owner's voice.
Yeah.
Get those messages across. So in our own little ways, we're all doing the same thing to support each other, and particularly other business women. So on that note, I look forward to seeing you again sometime. Definitely need to have more chats with you about stuff. But thank you so much for joining today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise, and thank you for contributing your tips to the book. So if anybody would like to buy a copy of the Boost Yourself Journal, there's a link above the live here for you to do that. But even if you just go onto Amazon and search Boost Yourself, Boost Your Brand, you should be able to find the journal that way. But on that note, thank you. Until next time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye for now.